If you've ever wondered what it's like to be a recruited athlete, today I'm going to spill my experience as a Division I ex-track athlete at Brown. I'll talk about what I learned through balancing athletics and academics, and I'll share my tips for what you should consider if you or your kid is considering getting recruited as an athlete. For background, I got recruited in pole vault, which is a field sport in track and field. I started pole vaulting my first year of high school, and I didn't start to seriously try to get recruited until I think my second year of high school. As far as which schools I was optimizing for, I didn't want a scholarship for track primarily because I didn't want my athletic ability to be tied to how much scholarship I could get. If I got hurt, or if I wasn't competing at a high enough level, if I just simply didn't want to be a part of the track team anymore, my sports scholarship could be revoked. So as a result of that, I was shooting for NCAA Division III schools, which tend to be smaller liberal arts colleges, and I was also shooting for the Ivy League. Many people don't know that while the Ivy League is Division I, they don't give any sports scholarships. They only give need-based scholarships. And I think this may be the case for the liberal arts schools as well. But I know at least for the Ivy League, they only give need-based scholarships. I knew I probably wasn't going to have a professional career out of this, so first and foremost, I wanted to go to school to have a good degree. And yeah, I wasn't gonna pursue a professional career out of pole vaulting. I started reaching out to college coaches summer of junior year / early senior year. I had a great junior year season in high school, so I was pretty lucky that the timing worked out quite nicely. I got letters from some schools as well, which started some conversations, and I also very actively reached out via email to coaches. So I had my eye on Brown. They have what's called an open curriculum that would have let me explore my interests because at the time I didn't really know what I wanted to study. I also knew that I would probably have the best chance getting recruited there out of most of the other Ivies because at the time they had a very small women's pole vault team. Late summer, I started emailing the jumps coach and I think the head coach, but that communication kind of fell off. Early in the fall senior year, I started calling and leaving voicemails to the jumps coach, I think probably every 2 weeks for 2 months, and I didn't really get a response. And then early fall of senior year, I was on another recruiting trip for a school in New England. My brother lived in Providence at the time, so I stopped by Providence and I decided to walk into the track coach's office. I met with the head coach. I basically said, "Hi, my name is Carly. I jump 11 feet 7 inches and I would really love to pole vault for Brown." I might have told him my GPA. I think overall it was a very short conversation. Essentially, he then introduced me to the jumps coach, and the jumps coach and I had a pretty short conversation as well. I think he was just vibing me out and just figuring out if I would be a good addition to the team. That was pretty much it for that meeting. We exchanged contact information, and I think he asked me to send over my transcript, my SAT scores, my SAT subject scores, basically the academic material. Before the early decision deadline, the coach told me that they would be supporting my application. So basically that means the track team tells the admissions department that they want me as an athlete on the track team. So I applied early decision to Brown, and a few weeks after I sent in my application, they sent me what's called a likely letter, essentially saying that I was likely going to be admitted. Track was intense. It's quite taxing on the body. So collegiate season includes indoor and outdoor season. In high school, I only did outdoor season. Basically, we started practice right when school started on the first day of school, and pretty much we ended on the last couple of weeks of school. If you were doing NCAAs, then it stretched into June. Different teams have different practice schedules throughout the year. So some sports might get on campus a month before the school year starts to start conditioning. Other sports might have a comparatively shorter season where the season begins and ends within the school year. So it really depends on the sport. During the off season, we practiced roughly 6 days a week, so Monday through Saturday. And from the moment I walked into the facilities to when I walked out, it was roughly maybe 2.5 to 3 hours was the norm. It might average around 3 hours if I was nursing an injury. So I would go in earlier and then stay later to do the exercises to help me get better. Then during the competition season, we would usually compete Friday or Saturday, which were usually whole day events. For some meets, we stayed overnight, so we might be off campus for a couple of days. Looking back, my coach was quite flexible, which I really appreciated. For the most part, I was able to schedule training around my classes, which isn't always the case for other sports and maybe even other members on the track team. I never had to sacrifice an important class for training time, so for the most part, I was able to manage it quite well. The flexibility, I would say, really depends on the sport, the coach, and how team dependent your sport is. One of the nice perks was that we got our laundry done. So we would clip our sweats or our practice clothes in a loop, and we'd throw it in the hamper. The next day, it would be returned on the locker for us. We were issued training shoes, competition shoes, and some articles of clothing. We also bought articles of clothing too as a team, though we weren't required to do so. There were separate lifting facilities for athletes, and they were really, really nice. And there were also snacks in the weight room for recovery as well. When we traveled, we usually stayed in pretty nice hotels because the breakfast had to be good enough to fuel us for competition. Some schools give student athletes the ability to register first because they have such specific training schedules. We didn't have that, but if I was already in a class and I wanted my pick of a specific discussion session or a specific time block of a class, I could usually talk to the professor and we'd be able to work something out. I will say some of the more sport-intensive schools have many, many more perks for their student athletes. I personally studied computer science, which was really intensive for me, and many of my other teammates also studied really difficult majors as well. I would often have to skip Friday classes for meets. So in order to not fall behind, I would have to schedule time to watch the lecture recording, and I might have one day less on the weekend to do homework as well, so I had to plan accordingly. There were times where I had to take midterms earlier than the rest of the class because I'd be leaving for competition on the day of the exam, so I had to plan to be ready for those also. I did track for 3 of the 4 years in college, and track had been my identity for around 7 years at the time. Making the decision to quit was really hard, but my body was so exhausted and I was nursing a couple of recurring injuries. I remember there was a point where every time I took a pole vault jump, it felt like I was taking a year off my life because of how tired my body was. I also wanted 1 year where I could be just a student, so I quit after my junior year season, and that was the first time quitting was such a big deal to me, and I think it was a huge lesson for me. I feel like there's a lot of shame around quitting, especially in sports, where we're constantly told to finish strong, finish it, whether it be a workout or competition, whatever it may be. So it was definitely a hard decision, but it was also the right one for me. Honestly, if I were to do it over again, I might have quit earlier because of how burnt out my body was at the time. Physically, I felt like track taught me how to be a little bit more intuitive with my body. I learned how my body changes and feels based off of what I eat and how much activity I have. I also learned how to gauge if soreness was good soreness or if I needed to take a break because of a risk of injury. The Ivy League specifically uses what's called an academic index score, which is a metric that determines a student's academic recruitability. It's based off of your test scores and your GPA, so the SAT or ACT. It might be based off of other things as well. But basically, the average AI score of every team has to meet a certain threshold. So some coaches might recruit athletes who have a lower AI score but have really, really strong sport stats. And they might balance it out with another recruit who has a really high AI score, but like strong, but not as strong sport stats. They can also balance it out with walk-on athletes too, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to get recruited, you have to make that decision relatively early. I made the decision to try to get recruited my second year in high school, but depending on which sport you're a part of, verbal commitments can happen as early as an athlete's second year in high school. And that's not to say that you wouldn't be able to get recruited for that sport later on in your high school career. It's just that the number of spots you're going for might be a little bit less. You need to have videos of yourself in competition and post it online. I personally posted my videos to YouTube. When you reach out to coaches, you might include some stats about yourself, but it's more helpful to show rather than tell. And so that's the importance of having a recruiting highlight reel. And specifically have videos of yourself in competition because performing under pressure is different than performing in practice. And the competition is what really matters at the end of the day. And that leads me to my next point, which is be proactive in reaching out to coaches. If you go on a school's athletics website, there's almost always a prospective athlete questionnaire. You should definitely fill that out, but also go a step further and send an email to the coach that you're interested in working with. You can include your stats and you'll also have a reel, so add that into the email as well. Definitely check out the team roster and see if anyone who plays the position that you play is graduating soon. For example, if you're a 400 meter runner and all of the school's 400 meter runners are juniors or seniors, the coach is probably going to be actively recruiting new 400-meter runners. Almost everyone competing at a high level is nursing an injury. During my track days, I had problems with my shins. I also had lower back pain, which I later found out was a permanent stress fracture. Now I know how to keep the pain in check, but if you are interested in pursuing athletics at a high level, many athletes will be nursing injuries for the majority of their careers. Just because you get the okay that your application will be supported doesn't mean that you automatically get in, nor does having an acceptance in your hand mean that you can slack off. You have to make sure that your GPA is above a certain threshold and just don't get into any trouble. There was at least one recruit for the track team at Brown, maybe two, who had their acceptances revoked because their grades just plummeted after they got accepted. So definitely be aware of that. The majority of students get recruited by the early decision deadline, but not all of them. There are definitely still some spots for regular decision too, so don't discount that. If you don't get recruited but you still want to pursue collegiate athletics, you can consider walking onto the team. If your stats are just under the marks of the competitive team, the coach might let you walk on and train with the team for competition. There were always a few walk-ons per year on my track team, and they were always treated the same as recruited athletes. Some went on to be really good, and some also went on to become the captain of our track team in their upperclassmen years. I hope this video cleared up any curiosity you had around getting recruited as a collegiate student athlete. Let me know in the comments below if anything surprised you. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.